Hey guys, Greg Knuckles here for stringtheory.com, string with an E, and jtsstrength.com. And today we are talking about work capacity. First off, what is work capacity? In essence, it is the maximum amount of work that you can do in the gym and recover from and respond positively to. Now, why is it important? Because, not to overstate things, it is the cornerstone of long-term progress in the gym. Over time, you simply have to do more work to continue getting results. It's a very basic principle of exercise physiology known as the repeated bouts effect, that when you do the same thing over and over and over, your body adapts to it and essentially doesn't respond as robustly to it as it once did. So over time, you simply have to do more to keep making progress. And that's why work capacity is so important, because the amount of work you can maximally do right now is probably not as much work as you would need to do to reach your long-term potential. So essentially, it's a ceiling on the amount of work you can do. So if your ceiling's here now, that's going to cap how much progress you can make. So you need to raise that ceiling over time to keep getting bigger and stronger. So that dovetails into a discussion about plateaus. Essentially, what happens with a plateau is you're working out, you're doing basically the same stuff week in and week out, you're making progress for a while, and then you hit a wall and stop making progress. And that pretty much happens because the amount of work you need to do to keep making progress is more than the amount of work you're currently doing. So the simplest way to keep moving forward is simply to do more work. I've written about that before. I'll link the article in the description. So anyway, you need to do more work. So that works for a while, as long as the amount of work you need to do to keep moving forward is below your work capacity, the ceiling of the amount of work you can do. So, you hit a plateau, you do more work, you make more progress, you hit another plateau, you do more work, you make more progress. And that's all well and good until the amount of work you need to do is bumping up against your work capacity. And what happens at that point is, since work capacity is the maximal amount you can do and recover from and adapt positively to, if you end up needing to do more than that to make progress, then when you increase your workload above that threshold, essentially you can't recover from it and respond positively to it anymore. And that's when overreaching or overtraining starts to set in. So from that point, the only way forward is to increase your work capacity. So that's where your aerobic system comes in, because it's the main driver of how much energy your body can produce to fuel that work. So if, let's say you're doing sets of 5 or so, and it takes you 5 minutes to recover between sets, but you only have, an hour or two to work out, and the amount of work you need to do to keep moving forward is greater than the amount of work you can cram into that time period because you're so gassed after sets, then acutely your aerobic metabolism, the amount of energy your aerobic system can produce, is limiting your work capacity and how much training you can do. There are also chronic limiters to work capacity, and they mainly have to do with how well you can recover between workouts. A big one is how resilient your body is to muscle damage. The more you train, the less muscle damage is caused by a given workload, so your body has to do less to recover from that. And kind of on the flip side of that is how efficiently your body can synthesize the protein necessary to recover from a given workload. Also, your muscles and tendons' resiliency to a given level and amount of loading, that essentially increases the amount of work you can do before your muscles and tendons and joints start feeling beaten up by the amount of training you have to do to keep moving forward. And another thing for recovery between sessions is your autonomic nervous system. The more parasympathetic you are, that's your rest and digest system, as opposed to sympathetic, that's your fight or flight system. The more parasympathetic you are, the more robust of a recovery state your body is in between workouts. Finally, we're going to talk about how to increase work capacity. A lot of this just has to do with basic smart periodization. If you've been training pretty similarly for a long period of time, you've been increasing your volume, you've finally hit a plateau, and your lifts aren't going anywhere, you're not getting any bigger or any stronger, then what you have to do is, if you're using block periodization terms, cycle back and do what would be called an accumulation block, or if you aren't big on terminology, basically just doing more work and lowering the weights you're working with. The average weights you're working with. There are two ways to accomplish this. Number one is simply to keep training with the same basic setup you are now, but to decrease training weights anywhere from 5 to 15% and increase the amount of total reps you're doing in a workout, so you're handling a larger training volume. The other way is to shift the emphasis of your training and to make it less specific as to the lifts you're trying to increase. So if 60-70% of your training now is just squat, bench, and deadlift, or variations thereof, you can flip that around to maybe make that 20-30% of your training being the main lifts and still keep training them heavy, but then put a greater emphasis on accessory work that allows you to handle a higher total training volume. In terms of implementation, that phase would last anywhere from 2 to 4 months, depending on your level as a lifter. For someone who's more of a beginner, intermediate, hitting their first major plateaus, that might be 2 months. For someone more advanced, that might be 3-4 months, maybe even a little bit longer. And now during that period, your goal should still be to progress in a measurable fashion, except typically you would be progressing by trying to increase the amount of weight you have on the bar. But during that period, you would be trying to progress by increasing your weekly workload week to week. And just as a general rule of thumb, a 5 to 10% increase in workload week to week is a good place to start. So over 3 months, 12 weeks of training, that would be increasing your workload roughly 60 to 120%. And doubling your workload, that may sound like a lot, but when you really get into it, it's not nearly as bad as it sounds, especially because you're decreasing the loading a bit. And finally, it may be necessary to increase the amount of cardiovascular work you're doing, simply to increase the aerobic base to fuel this type of training. And for that, I would recommend basic low-intensity, steady-state cardio. Interval training seems to be in vogue lately, but during this period, remember, what you're trying to do is increase the stress on your body to long-term increase the amount of stress it can handle. And things like sprints, those are another very stressful exercise, both for your muscles and your nervous system. So you'd be better served there just to incline treadmill walk, low intensity, steady state on a bike, trying to keep your heart rate 125 to 140 for 25 to 60 minutes or so, 2 to 3 times a week. That will help improve your aerobic conditioning without significantly limiting your ability to recover between training sessions. So that's all for today, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Check out my website, stringtheory.com, and jtsstrength.com, where I'm the content manager. And also, please check out the link in the description. This is basically a video version of an article that I had written previously. So if you want to dig into this subject a little bit more, check that out. Thanks, guys.